Mr. President.
Democratic leader.
Mr. President, when Donald Trump and Doge began their work,
Democratic
they
leader.
kept saying the same thing. Mr. President, when Donald Trump and Doge began their work, said this is about cutting waste, the same thing. It's about efficiency. They said it's about meritocracy. Elon Musk and Doge unfortunately, this is about cutting waste. Has not been efficiency as advertised. It's about meritocracy. It's been utter chaos. Unfortunately, yesterday the Department of Veterans Affairs said they were reversing course on canceling billions of dollars in contract work. Yesterday, the Department of Veterans Affairs said they were reversing course, slashing on canceling billions of dollars in contract veterans. Because, as it turns out, slashing billions in funding that helps veterans. Yesterday, the Department of Veterans Affairs said they were reversing course on canceling billions of dollars in contract work. Because the Department of Veterans Affairs said they were reversing course billions in funding canceling billions of dollars in contract work. Extremely harmful for veterans. Slashing these VA cuts were loaded by Doge as an example of eliminating waste for veterans. The VA secretary claimed these VA cuts were loaded by Doge as an example of eliminating waste. Slides and write meeting minutes. The VA secretary claimed these contracts were for consultants. That's not even close to the truth. To make PowerPoint Let me read some examples of what Doge was actually prepared to cut. That's not even close to the truth. Funding for chemotherapy. Let me read some examples of what Doge was actually prepared to cut. Hardly make work. Funding for chemotherapy and imaging writing meeting minutes. Those funding for veterans with disabilities. Hardly make work. Cut. Even funding to help veterans suffering from veterans with disabilities. Cut. One contract would help over 20,000 veterans to help veterans track down their military service record from DOD. One contract would help over 20,000 veterans required. Track down their military service record, getting affordable treatment in order to prove their likely exposure, as is required. And Doge said, without these records, that too. Getting affordable treatment, even if the VA would likely be possible. Canceling these contracts, and firing these VA even if the VA reverses course, immediately damaging. Canceling these contracts, very damaging. Canceling these contracts and firing these VA staff rehire workers back in immediately damaging because they've moved on to very damaging. Or contracts aren't available that you can't rehire workers back in business elsewhere because they've moved on. And by then, the damage is done. Or contracts aren't available because they took their business elsewhere. Veterans can't continue. And by then, the damage is done. It could take months, maybe even years, to build this back. Operations that serve veterans built up continue as before. Veterans over the years, months, maybe even years to build this back. So to cut these services and then say, never mind, over the years, and many of us still ends up being very destructive. So sadly, to cut these services and then say, never mind, still ends up being very destructive. Led his first cabinet meeting of this administration. This is only one example. He admitted that Doge's approach led to many erroneous cabinet staff and programs that are not wasteful. He admitted that Doge's approach has led to many erroneous cuts to staff with USAID. One of the things we accidentally canceled was briefly, very briefly, for example, Ebola prevention. With USAID, one of the things we accidentally canceled was briefly, are you kidding me? Very briefly, was Ebola prevention. Stop one of the deadliest diseases in the world is reckless. Mr. President. Are you especially when there's an Ebola outbreak in Uganda as we speak? One of the deadliest diseases in the world is reckless. Leave Kampala every day and go all over the world. Outbreak in Uganda as we speak. When epidemics hit America, they often from Kampala leave Kampala every day and go all over the world. To prevent those diseases from reaching us here at all, they oftentimes begin abroad. I should also U.S. funding is essential Ebola funding to prevent those diseases from reaching us here at all. Reports are out from last night that 95% of all USAID funding is now being cut. Reports are out from last night that 95% of all USAID funding is now being cut. What Doge is doing is not what efficiency looks like. We're not sure where it all is. If Doge actually cares about efficiency and meritocracy, what Doge is doing is not what in many ways looks like its own test. If Doge actually cares about efficiency and meritocracy, which might be wasteful, then it's failing in many ways. its own
and then make
test.
the cuts to the wasteful
It would be better to
programs.
look at these programs,
Not take a meat axe,
see
a
which might be
blowtorch,
wasteful,
call it what you will,
see which
cut
are
everything,
needed,
and then say,
and then make
we'll
the cuts
restore
to the wasteful programs.
some of the things that we
Not
shouldn't
take
have
a
cut.
meat axe, a blowtorch,
Because
call it
once
what you
you
will,
make those
cut
cuts,
everything, and then say,
it's very
we'll
hard to put
restore
the pieces
some of
back
the things that we
together.
shouldn't have cut.
Because
On
once
Republican
you make
taxes.
those cuts,
Last month,
it's very
consumer
hard to put the
confidence
pieces
took its
back
biggest nosedive
together.
in 4 years.
Biggest nosedive
On
in 4
Republican
years.
taxes.
This is how confident
Last month,
consumers,
consumer
average Americans
confidence
feel
took its
about the
biggest
economy.
nosedive in 4 years.
Inflation is
Biggest
trending
nosedive
up,
in 4 years.
trending
This is
back
how
up.
confident
The
consumers,
price of
average
eggs is
Americans
sky high.
feel about the economy.
The threat of a trade war
Inflation
looms
is
over our
trending
country.
trending back
And
up.
Americans are fearful.
The price of
that
eggs is
things are
sky
not gonna
high.
get any better.
The threat of a
anytime
trade war
soon.
looms over our
And
country.
what are Republicans doing
And
about all
Americans
these?
are
All of
fearful
this, that things are not
trying
going
to
get
cut
any better
taxes
anytime
for
soon.
billionaires.
And what are
Trying to cut
Republicans
taxes
doing about all
for
these? All of
billionaires.
this, and make the
Trying to
American
cut
people
taxes
pay for it.
for billionaires.
The Republican
Trying
agenda
to
is
cut
quickly
taxes
taking
for
shape.
billionaires.
Under Donald
And
Trump's
make the
Republican
American
Party,
people pay for
billionaires
it.
win. The Republican
American
agenda is
families
quickly taking
lose.
shape. It doesn't
Under Donald
matter
Trump's
if
Republican
Republicans
Party
go with one
billionaires
one
win,
bill or 2 bills
American
or 50
families
bills. That's what
lose.
they're debating right now.
It doesn't matter.
Their end game,
if
House and
Republicans
Senate
go with
Republicans, has
one
always
bill
been
or 2 bills
cutting
or
taxes
50
for
bills.
billionaires.
That's what they're debating right
enforcing
now.
American families.
Their end game, House
Pick up
and
the
Senate
tab.
Republicans, has always been,
Of course,
cutting
Senate
taxes
Republicans
for billionaires.
know that cutting
Enforcing
Medicaid by
American
over
families
$800 billion to
to
lower
pick up the
taxes
tab.
for billionaires is wildly unpopular.
Of course, Senate
They
Republicans
know that increasing the
cutting
deficit
Medicaid
by
by
over
over
$800
$800
billion to
help
lower taxes
ultra-rich
for billionaires is wildly
the
unpopular.
ultra-rich contradicts
They know that
everything
increasing the deficit
so-called
by up to
party
$5
of
trillion
fiscal
to help
responsibility
ultra-rich
stands for.
They say they have to cut all this stuff to reduce the deficit,
so-called
and then
party
with their
of
tax
fiscal
breaks for billionaires, they
responsibility
increase
stands
the
for.
deficit. They say
No
they
matter
have to
what
cut all
sleight
this
of hand
stuff to
accounting
reduce the
method they
deficit,
use.
and then with their tax breaks for billionaires, they increase the deficit.
What are Republicans
No matter what sleight of hand
doing
accounting method
about
they use.
fiscal responsibility?
Are they admitting that their plans
What
would
are
be a
Republicans
disaster for the deficit?
doing
Nope.
about
Instead,
fiscal
Senate
responsibility?
Republicans are
they
engaged in
admitting
budgetary
that their
hocus
plans
pocus
would
to
be a
hide the
disaster
true
for
cost
the
of their
deficit?
tax cuts
Nope.
for the ultra-rich.
Instead,
Senate Republicans
And there may be
are
signs that
engaged
House
in
Republicans
budgetary
are going
hocus
along
pocus to hide the true
instead
cost
of
of their
admitting
tax
the
cuts
truth
for the ultra-rich.
about the consequences of
And
their
there may be
plans.
signs that House
They're pursuing a
Republicans are
gimmick
going along.
called current policy
Instead of
baseline, a
admitting the
gimmick if
truth
there ever was one,
about the consequences
which is
of their
essentially an
plans,
attempt to
they're pursuing a gimmick
turn
called
$5
current
trillion
policy
of
baseline,
deficit
a gimmick if there
spending
ever was
into
one,
$0,
which is
of deficit
essentially an
spending.
attempt
Well,
to
that can't happen
magically
and doesn't happen.
turn
The
$5 trillion
economy will
of
realize it
deficit
doesn't
spending
happen.
into
Any
junior
$0
high school
of
math
deficit
student could
spending.
tell
Well,
you
that
this is a
can't
bunch
happen
of
and
bunk.
doesn't happen. And the
You
economy
can't pass
will
$5
realize it
trillion
doesn't happen.
to cut taxes
Any
for the
junior
rich
high school
and
math
pretend
student
like
could
it
tell
doesn't
you
affect
this is
the
a bunch of
deficit.
bunk.
You can't pass
The
$5
issue
trillion
isn't
to cut
complicated.
taxes for the
Republicans
rich
are trying
and
to
pretend
hide
like it doesn't
the
affect
true
the
cost of
deficit.
their billionaire tax cuts from the American
The issue
people.
isn't complicated. Republicans are trying to
Meanwhile,
hide the true
they're
cost
getting ready
of their
to
billionaire
eviscerate
tax
funding
cuts
for
from
health
the
care
American
that serves
people.
over 80 million Americans, kids, seniors,
Meanwhile,
rural communities. They're getting
these
ready
cuts to
eviscerate
Medicaid will
funding for
dramatically hurt
healthcare that
rural
serves
America,
over 80 million Americans,
people with
kids,
disabilities,
seniors,
and more.
rural communities.
And the these cuts to Medicaid will dramatically hurt rural America. Opposing
people
this
with
is the Hard
disabilities
Right Freedom
and more.
Caucus, because they seem to
The
really
only
care
people
about the
who
deficit.
seem
to,
let's hope they stay
be
strong for the
opposing
sake of
this
the economy
is the
of
Hard
this
Right
country.
Freedom Caucus, because they seem
Of course,
to really care about the
the
deficit.
American people are
Let's
not
hope
going to
they stay
take these
strong for the sake
Medicaid
of the
cuts
economy
lying
of this
down.
country. Last night I
Of
got on a
course,
Zoom. Over
the American
3,000
people
New
are
Yorkers
not gonna
worried
take
about
these
the attacks
Medicaid
from
cuts lying
Republicans
down.
on health care.
Last night I got
On the Zoom. Over 3,000
Many
New
more
Yorkers
than we
worried
expected.
about the attacks from
But
Republicans
these were
on health
rank
care.
and file folks,
Got on the
healthcare
Zoom.
advocates, union members,
Many more than we
and concerned
expected.
citizens from all walks
But
of
these
life.
were rank and file folks.
They were
healthcare
all
advocates,
upset
union members, and
about
concerned
the cuts to
citizens from
Medicaid.
all walks of life, and making
They were all
putting
upset
those cuts
about the cuts
in
to
place in
Medicaid.
order to give tax breaks for
And making
billionaires.
it
was a great call. It was an energizing call. I urge my colleagues to do the same. In order to give tax breaks for billionaires. Many of them are. It was a great call. It was an energizing call. I urge my colleagues to do the same.
A reminder that
many
the
of them
American
are.
people don't like these
It's
cuts.
a stark reminder of what's
We've
at
heard
stake,
from New Yorkers who are in
but
danger
also
of having their Medicaid coverage taken away
cuts.
if Republicans We've heard from New Yorkers who are in danger of having their Medicaid coverage taken away.
But we also talked about taking
if
action.
Republicans proceed
I
with
urged
their actions on
participants to
this
call their
Zoom
members of
over
Congress.
3,000 people.
I urged them to mobilize
We also
online
talked
and
about
to
taking
organize in
action
their
communities.
I urged participants
everyone
to call
to
their
make
members
their
of
voices
Congress.
heard, like we're seeing
I urged
in
them
the
to
town hall
mobilize
meetings.
online and to
I
organize in their
reminded folks that
communities.
organizing is
We
not
urged
easy, but it
everyone
works.
to make their voices
It changes
heard, like
things,
we're seeing in the
and it's
town
going to
hall
make
meetings.
a difference in
I
making
reminded
sure
folks that organizing is
Medicaid
not
is
easy, but it
protected.
works. It changes things.
And on our
And it's going to
education
make a difference
secretary
in
nominee,
making sure
today the Senate
Medicaid is
protected. Will vote on whether to advance
And on
the
our
nomination of
education
Linda McMahon as Secretary of
nominee.
Education. Today the Senate votes.
Ms.
McMahon's
will
nomination
vote
comes as President
on whether
Trump
to
has
advance
been
the
clear about
nomination
cutting
of Linda
funding for
McMahon as
education
Secretary of Education
and abolishing the Department of
Ms.
Education.
McMahon's
entirely.
nomination
comes as President
Is Ms.
Trump has
McMahon
been
going to
clear
go
about
along?
cutting
I
funding
hope
for
not.
education, cutting
And
abolishing the
education is
Department
not
of
what the
Education
American
entirely.
people want.
Is
The
Ms.
American
McMahon
people
gonna
don't
go
want a
along?
radical,
I hope
out-of-touch billionaire
Cutting education
slashing
is
funding
not
for public
what the American
schools.
people want.
When you
The
slash
American
federal
people don't
funding
want
for
a radical,
education, guess what
out-of-touch
happens?
billionaire slashing
Since so many of
funding
our
for
school
public
districts,
schools.
urban, suburban,
When you
rural,
slash federal funding for
depend on this
education,
federal
guess
money,
what happens?
Since so many of our
It
school
leads to higher
districts,
property
urban,
taxes for
suburban,
people
rural,
back home.
depend on this federal money. If you eliminate the Department of
It
Education as a
leads
whole,
to higher property
that
taxes
means
for
local
people back home.
communities are forced to pick up the tab to fund
you
the
eliminate
schools.
the Department of
It means that
Education as a
families
whole.
in these communities
That
will
means
pay in the
local
form of higher
communities
property
are forced
taxes
to pick up the
to make
tab
up
to
the
fund
loss
the
of federal
schools.
funding. It means that families in
communities
these
will
communities
also
will
be
pay
forced
in the
to
form of
slash
higher
other
property
programs
taxes
to make room
to
for
make up the
funding for
loss of
schools.
federal funding.
Again,
But communities
this is
will
not what
also
the American
be forced
people
to
want.
slash other programs.
This is not
to
what they
make room
voted for.
funding for
Ms.
schools.
McMahon, in my judgment, is
Again,
not qualified to
this is
lead
not what the
America's
American
public
people want.
education. This is
She
not what
seems
they
not to
voted
care
for.
very much about
Ms.
it.
McMahon, in my judgment,
that's
is not
precisely
qualified
why
to lead
President
America's
Trump
public
nominated her.
education. She's the
She
perfect
seems not to
choice
care very
bring
much
our
about
public
it.
education
But
system
that's precisely
burning
why
to the
President
ground.
Trump nominated
I yield the
her.
floor, note the absence. She's the perfect choice to bring our public
Clerk will call
education
the roll.
system burning
Ms.
to the
Also
ground.
Brooks.
I yield the floor, note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Also Brooks.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President.
Majority
This week, the Senate has focused on unleashing American energy.
Without
As
objection.
I've said before, our country is facing some serious energy challenges. This week, the Senate has focused on unleashing American energy. We face, as I've said before, our country is facing some serious energy challenges. Unreliable and unaffordable energy. We need more power, which is why President Trump declared an energy emergency on his first day in office. Unreliable and unaffordable energy. To produce more energy, which is why President Trump declared an energy emergency on his first day in office. To produce more energy, but our Democrat colleagues made it clear yesterday that they don't believe such an emergency prices down. The Senator Democrat from Virginia made it clear yesterday that they don't believe such an emergency exists. Our colleague from New Hampshire said it was, and I quote, Virginia an emergency declaration sham in search of an emergency. Our colleague from New Hampshire said it was, and I quote, and every Senate Democrat declaration to deny in search of an emergency that our country faces. End quote. And every Senate Democrat voted to deny the precarious state of emergency that our country faces. Last year, a Washington Post headline read, and I quote, of the precarious state of American energy. Last year, a Washington Post headline read, and I quote, a recent report from the North American Electric Reliability Corporation is running out of power again. End quote. Mounting resource adequacy challenges. North American Electric Reliability Corporation warns of, and I quote again, mounting Mr. President, whether Democrats want to acknowledge it or not, end quote, the signs of a rapidly approaching energy crisis are clear. So, Mr. President, whether Democrats want to acknowledge it or not enough signs of a rapidly approaching energy crisis are clear. Heightened prices for gas. There's a threat of blackouts. Utilities. Not enough Democrats don't think these are cause for alarm. Heightened prices whether they're willing to acknowledge it or not. Utilities. And yesterday's vote, Democrats don't think these are cause for alarm. We have a serious problem. Whether they're willing to acknowledge it or not. And if we don't do something about it, we face a future with an unreliable, they're not, and unaffordable we have a serious problem. And if we don't do something about it, we face a future with an unreliable. This week, the Senate is working to prevent two of the Biden administration's anti-energy policies from going into effect. This week, the Senate is working to prevent the Senate passed Senator Kennedy's resolution to stop the Biden administration's policies from going into archaeology rule. On Tuesday, the Senate passed Senator Kennedy's resolution to stop the Biden administration's an archaeological report before drilling if their project area was thought to include things like shipwrecks, settlements, or other archaeological sites before drilling. But last year, project area was thought to include things like decided to require settlements or other archaeological sites. But last year, offshore projects, the Biden administration decided to require archaeological reports for project will be near an archaeological site. Projects. It's just another way, Mr. President, to slow down production the project will be near and heap more costs on producers. It's just another way, Mr. President, to slow down production. And it's another part of the Biden administration's efforts to close off America's waters to conventional energy production. Costs that consumers eventually pay. Under President Biden, it's another part of the Biden administration's efforts to close off America's waters to conventional energy production. The administration's offshore permits included only 3 possible leases, down from 47. In an earlier draft, the administration's offshore leasing plan included only 3 possible leases, down from 47. President Biden's last-minute ban on oil and gas production in 625 million acres. And of course, there was President Biden's last-minute ban on oil and gas production in 625 million acres of our natural resources. America's waters is beyond me. And under Republican leadership, we will be leveraging those assets to restore our natural resources. American energy dominance is beyond me. Later today, the Senate will also vote on a resolution to block to restore the $6 billion natural gas tax that was included in Later today, the Senate will also vote on a resolution to block this tax would increase costs for energy producers and limit energy production, leading to higher utility bills for many Americans. This tax would increase costs for energy producers and limit energy production. It would hit smaller leading to higher utility bills for many Americans. On top of that, and under the Biden administration's implementation of this tax, it would hit smaller operations the hardest, including in natural gas rich states like Pennsylvania. The tax puts New Mexico, tens of thousands of jobs at risk, including in natural gas rich states to stop implementation of this tax on energy producers and North Dakota. And I appreciate Senator Hoeven's leadership. The Senate will vote later today to stop implementation of this tax on energy producers. To his efforts, energy producers will not have to worry about this unnecessary natural gas tax. Thanks in substantial part to his efforts, energy producers will not have to worry about this unnecessary natural gas tax. If Democrats would join us in our efforts about it driving up their utility bill. If not to avoid Mr. President, a rapidly approaching energy crisis. If Democrats would join us in our efforts to promote more affordable if not to avoid prices for Americans. Our rapidly approaching energy crisis. I've recently been hearing our Democrat colleagues express newfound interest prices fighting inflation. If they're serious about that, they should be joining us in blocking these anti-energy policies fighting or driving prices up. If they're serious about that, they should be joining us in blocking these anti-energy policies keep working to build driving prices a more secure and more affordable. But with Democrats or without, Republicans will keep working to build the floor, and I suggest the absence of a more secure
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Also
energy
Brooks.
future. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Also Brooks.
President.
Republican Witt.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
President. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, before
Republican
coming to
Witt.
the floor each day, I try to make sure I go through the morning newspapers, and today I found the Washington Post with an interesting column. I try to make sure I go through the morning newspapers, and today I found the Washington Post with an interesting column. A multi-car pileup as EVs collide with, and the reality is the Democrat electric vehicle mandate is a failure. Collide with reality. Failed the American people. And the reality is the Democrat electric vehicle mandate failed. Is a failure. For years, President Biden and Democrats tried to force Americans to buy electric vehicles. Failed. They tried to do it by banning. For years, President Biden and Democrats tried to force Americans to buy electric subsidies. They tried to do it by banning. Trump has rightly promised. They tried to do it by bribing people with Joe Biden's unpopular electric vehicle mandate. President Trump has rightly promised to pull the plug. President Trump fulfilled that promise unpopular electric vehicle mandate. People ended the Biden ban on gas-powered President Trump fulfilled that promise. My home state of Wyoming, your home state of Montana. That is the Biden ban on gas-powered vehicles. The next step is for my home state of Wyoming, your home state of Montana, subsidies on electric vehicles, and I've introduced legislation to do just that. The next step is for my bill ends the $7,500 subsidy. I've introduced legislation to do just that. It also closes the Biden loophole. My bill ends the $7,500 subsidy for EVs to communist China. It also closes the Biden subsidies for the EV funnels charging money, believe it or not, to communist China. EV subsidies were in essence a Biden ends the subsidies for the EV give money away to the coastal elites who drive electric vehicles. The EV subsidies were in essence a Biden's unpopular climate give money away to the coastal elites who drive electric vehicles. The push for EVs began and it was connected to Biden's unpopular climate dreams. It included a $7,500 handout for anyone who bought electric vehicle tax and spending bill. Well, not a single Republican in the House or Senate $7,500 handout for anyone who bought an electric vehicle. The Joint Committee on Taxation looked at the cost of these EV subsidies for that reckless tax. Because there was going to be a mandate attached. You were going to have to buy an electric vehicle. The Joint Committee on Taxation looked at the cost of these EV subsidies. Originally they said it might cost because there was going to be a mandate attached. You were going to have to buy an electric vehicle at some point. When they redid the math a year later, they said the cost estimated would be $100 billion. That's a lot of money. Outside analysts estimated the math a year later, they said the cost estimated would be $100 billion. Subsidies could cost outside analysts estimated the cost even higher. $294 Goldman Sachs said that the EV which is 28 times as much as the original, as much as $294 billion, which is 28 times as much as the original thought it would be. This is for a vehicle that most Americans can't afford, don't want. Doesn't work for them, doesn't work in my home state of Wyoming, it doesn't work, Mr. President. This is for a vehicle that most Americans can't afford, don't want. Most Americans know that EVs are luxury items. State of Wyoming, it doesn't work, Mr. Severe limitations. State of Montana. Certainly can't be the Americans know that EVs are luxury items. Most Americans. Severe limitations. Average cost of an EV certainly can't be the primary source of transportation. That's $16,000 more than the cost of most gas-powered vehicles. Average cost of an EV, $62,000. Dealers I talk to in my home state of Wyoming tell me that it takes significantly longer to sell an EV than a gas-powered vehicle. Dealers I talk to in my home state of Wyoming tell me that it takes significantly longer to sell an EV than a gas-powered vehicle. Nationwide sales of EVs is also stalled. EVs that they are able to sell lost market share in 2024. The nationwide sales of EVs is also stalled. EVs account for less than 10% market share in 2024 of all car sales in America. Despite endless subsidies are sold to wealthier Americans for less than 10%. People who don't need a subsidy from the government to begin with. And most of these are sold to wealthier Americans. People who don't need a subsidy from the government to begin with. It's a transfer of money from hardworking American families. This is social engineering to benefit the liberal elite. Every time a wealthy transfer of money from hardworking American families to the when they go and buy an electric car, a working class family wealthy liberal in San Francisco gets a government subsidy when they go and buy an electric car. My legislation ends all that. Family in Sheridan, Wyoming, bad investment for American people in their taxes and for American automakers. My legislation ends all of that. This month, Ford projected that in 2025 it would lose people over $5.5 billion. This month, Ford projected that in 2025 it would lose over $5.5 billion on its electric vehicles. It lost $5 billion. 2024, that's a loss of $60,000 for each and every electric vehicle that they were able to sell. Lost $5 billion. Now, Ford isn't alone. $60,000. General Motors and others are also losing money that they were able to sell. The transition Ford isn't alone. To EVs is also estimated to kill hundreds of thousands of jobs, also losing money including in the Midwest. The manufacturing jobs to EVs is also estimated to kill hundreds of thousands of jobs, thousands of American including in the Midwest, line manufacturing to the unemployment of gas-powered vehicles. Ending already sending thousands of American savings taxpayer money, protecting the unemployment jobs. But it's also about protecting our national security. Is about savings taxpayer money. Initially, only EVs made in America jobs were supposed to be eligible for this $7,500 subsidy. Initially, only EVs made in America were supposed to be eligible for those tax credits on EVs. Before leaving office, Joe Biden from China made it easier for those tax credits on EVs, but Biden and the Democrats to go for those made so desperate to force EVs on the American public. They created a Biden and the Democrats so desperate to force EVs on the American public, they created customers who lease EVs instead of buy them, but who lease EVs made with Chinese parts. It allows customers who lease EVs instead of buy them, but who lease EVs made with Chinese parts. Batteries come from China. They could still fully receive the subsidy. They noted a major problem. Well, since 80% of the EV batteries come from China, that's why they came up with this leasing loophole. They had noted a major problem. In 2022, before they had the loophole, only 7% of subsidies. That's why they came up with this leasing loophole. Because in 2022, before they had the loophole, only 7% of new EVs were leased. Because of this Biden gimmick, that number jumped to 45%, almost. American taxpayers are subsidizing technologies controlled by communist China. It is wrong. My bill ends that. The American taxpayers are subsidizing technologies controlled by communist China. It is wrong. Prices, unleashing American energy, creating American jobs. Republicans are focused on what matters back in the driver's seat. Lowering prices, unleashing American energy, creating American jobs, and putting Americans back in the driver's seat.
Call the roll.
Is that also Brooks?
Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. Note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk, call the roll.
Is that also Brooks?